Friedrich Ebert was a German politician of the Social Democratic Party of Germany and the first president of Germany from 1919 until his death in office in 1925. Ebert was elected leader of the SPD on the death in 1913 of August Bebel. In 1914, shortly after he assumed leadership, the party became deeply divided over Ebert's support of war loans to finance the German war effort in World War I. A moderate social democrat, Ebert was in favor of the Burgfrieden, a political policy that sought to suppress squabbles over domestic issues among political parties during wartime in order to concentrate all forces in society on the successful conclusion of the war effort. He tried to isolate those in the party opposed to the war, but could not prevent a split. Ebert was a pivotal figure in the German Revolution of 1918–19. When Germany became a republic at the end of World War I, he became its first chancellor. His policies at the time were primarily aimed at restoring peace and order in Germany and containing the more extreme elements of the revolutionary left. In order to accomplish these goals, he allied himself with conservative and nationalistic political forces, in particular the leadership of the military under General Wilhelm Graener and the right-wing Freikorps. With the help, Ebert's government crushed a number of leftist uprisings that were pursuing goals similar to those of the SPD. This has made him a controversial historical figure. Early life. Ebert was born in Heidelberg on 4 February 1871 as the fourth of 6 children of the tailor Karl Ebert and his wife Katharina. Although he wanted to attend university, this proved impossible due to the lack of funds of his family. Instead, he trained as a saddle maker from 1885 to 1888. After he became a journeyman in 1889, he traveled, according to the German custom, from place to place in Germany, seeing the country and learning fresh details of his trade. In Mannheim, he was introduced by an uncle to the Social Democratic Party and joined the party in 1889. Although Ebert studied the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, he was less interested in ideology than in practical and organizational issues that would improve the lot of the workers then and there. Ebert was on the blacklist of the police due to his political activities, so he kept changing his place of residence. Between 1889 and 1891 he lived in Kassel, Braunschweig, Elberfeld, Barmen, Remscheid, Quakenbrück and Bremen, where he founded and chaired local chapters of the Sattlerverband. After settling in Bremen in 1891, Ebert made a living doing odd jobs. In 1893, he obtained an editorial post on the socialist Bremer Bürgerzeitung. In May 1894, he married Louise Rump, a manual laborer, who had been employed as a housemaiden in labeling boxes and who was active in union work. He then rented a pub that became a center of socialist and union activity and was elected party chairman of the Bremen SPD. In 1900, Ebert was appointed a trade union secretary and elected a member of the Bremer Bürgerschaft as representative of the Social Democratic Party. In 1904, Ebert presided over the National Convention of the party in Bremen and became better known to a wider public. He became a leader of the moderate wing of the Social Democratic Party and in 1905 Secretary General of the SPD, at which point he moved to Berlin. At the time, he was the youngest member of the Parteivorstand. Meanwhile, Ebert had run for a Reichstag seat several times in constituencies where the SPD had no chance of winning. 1898 Vector, 1903 and 1906 stayed. However, in 1912, he was elected to the Reichstag for the constituency of Elberfeld-Barmen. This was the election that also made the SPD the strongest party in the Reichstag, with 110 out of a total of 397 members, surpassing the Centre Party. On the death of August Bebel on 13 August 1913, Ebert was elected as joint party chairman at the convention in Jena on 20 September with 433 out of 473 votes. His co-chairman was Hugo Haas. World War I. When the July crisis of 1914 erupted, Ebert was on vacation. After war was declared in early August, Ebert traveled to Zurich with party treasurer Otto Braun and the SPD's money to be in a position to build up a foreign organization if the SPD should be outlawed in the German Empire. He returned on 6 August and led the SPD Reichstag members to vote almost unanimously in favor of war loans, accepting that the war was a necessary patriotic defensive measure, especially against the autocratic regime of the Tsar in Russia. In January 1916, Haas resigned. Under the leadership of Ebert and other moderates, such as Philipp Scheidmann, the SPD party participated in the Burgfrieden, an agreement among the political parties in the Reichstag to suppress domestic policy differences for the duration of the war in order to concentrate the energies of the country solely on bringing the conflict to a successful conclusion for Germany. This positioned the party in favor of the war with the aim of a compromise peace, a stance that eventually led to a split in the SPD, with those radically opposed to the war leaving the SPD in early 1917 to form the USPD. Similar policy disputes caused Ebert to end his parliamentary alliance with several left-wing members of the Reichstag and start to work closely with the Centre Party and the Progress Party in 1916. Later those kicked out by Ebert called themselves Spartacists. Beginning in 1916, Ebert shared the leadership of his Reichstag delegates with Scheidmann. Although he opposed the policy of territorial gains secured through military conquest, Ebert supported the war effort overall as a defensive struggle. Ebert experienced the traumatic loss of having 2 of his 4 sons killed in the war. Heinrich died in February 1917 in Macedonia, whereas Georg was killed in action in May 1917 in France. In June 1917, a delegation of Social Democrats led by Ebert traveled to Stockholm for talks with socialists from other countries about a conference that would have sought to end the war without any annexions of territory. The initiative failed, however. In January 1918, when the workers in munition factories in Berlin went on strike, Ebert joined the strike leadership, but worked hard to get the strikers back to work. He was pilloried from the left as a traitor to the working class and from the right as a traitor to the fatherland. Revolution of 1918–19. Parliamentization. As the war continued, the military supreme command, nominally headed by Paul von Hindenburg, but effectively controlled by his subordinate Erich Ludendorff, became the de facto ruler of Germany. When it became clear that the war was lost in late summer and fall of 1918, Ludendorff started to favor the parliamentization of the German Empire, i.e. a transfer of power to those parties that held the majority in the Reichstag. The goal was to shift the blame for the military defeat from the old to the politicians of the majority parties. On the 29th of September 1918, Ludendorff suddenly informed Paul von Hinters, the German foreign minister, that the Western Front could collapse at any moment and that a ceasefire had to be negotiated without delay. However, he suggested that the request for the ceasefire should come from a new government sanctioned by the Reichstag majority. In his view, a revolution from above was needed. Chancellor Georg von Hertling and Emperor Wilhelm II agreed, although the former resigned. Scheidman and a majority of SPD deputies were opposed to joining a bankrupt enterprise, but Ebert convinced his party, arguing that "we must throw ourselves into the breach, and it is our damned duty to do it." In early October, the emperor appointed a liberal, Prince Maximilian of Baden, as chancellor to lead peace negotiations with the Allies. The new government for the first time included ministers from the SPD, Philipp Scheidman and Gustav Bauer. The request for a ceasefire went out on the 4th of October. On the 5th of October, the government informed the German public about these events. However, there was then a delay, as the American President Wilson initially refused to agree to the ceasefire. His diplomatic notes seem to indicate that the changes to the German government were insufficient, and the fact that Wilhelm II remained head of state was a particular obstacle. Ebert did not favor exchanging the monarchy for a republic, but like many others, he was worried about the danger of a socialist revolution, which seemed more likely with every day that passed. On the 28th of October, the constitution was changed to transfer power to the Reichstag. At this point, the majority parties of the Reichstag, including Ebert's SPD, were quite satisfied with the state of affairs. What they now needed was a period of calm to deal with the issue of negotiating an armistice and a peace treaty. The November Revolution. The plans of the new German government were thrown into disarray when a confrontation between officers and crews on board the German fleet at Wilhelmshaven on the 30th of October set in motion a train of events that would result in a revolution that spread over a substantial part of the country. Over the next week, against the backdrop of the country falling into anarchy, the SPD led by Ebert on the 7th of November demanded a more powerful voice in the cabinet, an extension of parliamentarism to the state of Prussia, and the renunciation of the throne by both the emperor and his oldest son, Crown Prince Wilhelm. Ebert had favored retaining the monarchy under a different ruler, but at this time told Prince Maximilian von Baden, "If the Kaiser does not abdicate, the social revolution is inevitable. But I do not want it. I even hate it like sin." On the left, the Spartacists and a group of around 80 to 100 popular labor leaders from Berlin known as Revolutionary Stewards prepared for a revolution in the capital. On the 9th of November, the revolution reached Berlin as the larger companies were hit by a general strike called by the Spartacists and the Revolutionary Stewards, but also supported by the SPD and the mainstream unions. Workers' and soldiers' councils were created and important buildings occupied. As the striking masses marched on the center of Berlin, the SPD, afraid of losing its influence on the revolution, announced that it was resigning from the government of Prince Maximilian. Meanwhile, Prince Maximilian failed to convince Emperor Wilhelm II, who was at the army headquarters at Spa, Belgique, of the need to abdicate. Wilhelm had resigned himself to the loss of the imperial crown, but still thought he could remain King of Prussia. When Max failed to convince him of the unreality of this belief, he unilaterally and untruthfully announced that Wilhelm had in fact abdicated and that the crown prince had agreed to relinquish his right of succession. Shortly thereafter, the SPD leadership arrived at the Chancellery and Ebert asked Prince Maximilian to hand over the government to him. After a short meeting of the cabinet, the Chancellor resigned and, in an unconstitutional move, handed his office over to Ebert, who thus became Chancellor of Germany and Minister-President of Prussia, the first socialist, the second politician, and the second commoner to hold either office. Ebert left the government of of Prince Maximilian mostly unchanged, but appointed SPD operatives for the Prussian Minister of War and for the military commander of the Berlin area. Ebert's first action as Chancellor was to issue a series of proclamations asking the people to remain calm, stay out of the streets and to restore peace and order. It failed to work. Ebert then had lunch with Scheidmann at the Reichstag and, when asked to do so, refused to speak to the masses gathered outside. Scheidmann, however, seized the chance, in hopes of forestalling whatever the communist leader Karl Liebknecht was telling his followers at the now former royal palace. Scheidmann proclaimed Germany a republic. A furious Ebert promptly reproached him. "You have no right to proclaim the Republic." By this he meant that the decision was to be left to an elected National Assembly, even if the decision might be the restoration of the monarchy. Later that day, Ebert even asked Prince Maximilian to stay on as regent, but was refused, since Wilhelm II had not actually abdicated on the 9th of November. Germany legally remained a monarchy until the Emperor signed his formal abdication on the 28th of November. But when Wilhelm handed over supreme command of the army to Paul von Hindenburg and left for the Netherlands on the morning of the 10th of November, the country was effectively without a head of state. An entirely socialist provisional government based on workers' councils was about to take power under Ebert's leadership. It was called the Council of the People's Deputies. Ebert found himself in a quandary. He had succeeded in bringing the SPD to power, and he was now in a position to put into law social reforms and improve the lot of the working class. Yet as a result of the revolution, he and his party were forced to share power with those on the left whom he despised, the Spartacists and the Independents. In the afternoon of the 9th of November, he grudgingly asked the USPD to nominate 3 ministers for the future government. Yet that evening a group of several hundred followers of the revolutionary stewards occupied the Reichstag building and were holding an impromptu debate. They called for the election of soldiers and workers' councils the next day with an item name a provisional government, the Council of the People's Deputies. In order to keep control of events and against his own anti-revolutionary convictions, Ebert decided that he needed to co-opt the workers' councils and thus become the leader of the revolution while at the same time serving as the formal head of the German government. On the 10th of November, the SPD, led by Ebert, managed to ensure that a majority of the newly elected workers' and soldiers' councils came from among their own supporters. Meanwhile, the USPD agreed to work with him and share power in the Council of the People's Deputies, the new revolutionary government. Ebert announced the pact between the two socialist parties to the assembled councils, who were eager for a unified socialist front, and approved the parity of 3 members each coming from SPD and USPD. Ebert and Haas for the USPD were to be the joint chairman. The same day, Ebert received a telephone call from old Chief of Staff Wilhelm Graener, who offered to cooperate with him. According to Graener, he promised Ebert the loyalty of the military in exchange for some demands: a fight against Bolshevism, an end to the system of soldiers and workers' councils, a national assembly, and a return to a state of law and order. This initiated a regular communication between the two that involved daily telephone conversations over a secret line. According to Graener, the agreements between the two became known as the Ebert-Graener Pact. Council of the People's Deputies. In domestic policy, a number of social reforms were quickly introduced by the Council of the People's Deputies under Ebert's leadership, including unemployment benefits, the 8-hour workday, universal suffrage for everyone over the age of 20, the right of farm hands to organize, and increases in workers' old age, sick and unemployment benefits. A decree of the 12th of November 1918 established the Reich Office for Economic Demobilization. with the purpose of carrying the German economy over to peace conditions. On the 22nd of November 1918, a regulation was issued by the Reich Food Office for election to peasants and workers' councils, which were subscribed to by all agricultural associations. Quote, on the 23rd of November 1918, the Reich Office for Economic Demobilization issued 12 regulations which set forth rules governing duration of the working day, sick leaves, paid vacations, and other aspects of labor relations within the German economy. A decree of the Office for Economic Demobilization made on the 9th of December 1918 provided that the state governments should require the communes and communal unions to establish departments for general vocational guidance and for placement of apprentices. On the 23rd of November 1918, an order was introduced prohibiting work in bakeries between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. In December 1918, the income limit for entitlement to health insurance coverage was raised from 2,500 to 5,000 marks. The right of free assembly and association, which was extended even to government workers and officials, was made universal, and all censorship was abolished. The Gesindeordnung was revoked, and all discriminatory laws against agricultural workers were removed. A provisional order on the 24th of January 1919 provided various rights for agricultural workers. In addition, provisions for labor protection were restored, and a number of decrees were issued establishing freedom of the press, religious freedom, and freedom of speech, and amnesty of political prisoners. Protections for home workers were also improved, and housing provision was increased. A decree of the 23rd of December 1918 regulated wage agreements, laying down that a wage agreement that had been concluded in any branch of employment between the competent trade union authority and the competent employer's authority had absolute validity, meaning that no employer could enter into any other agreement of his own initiative. In addition, an organization of arbitral courts was set up to decide all disputes. A decree of the 4th of January 1919 compelled employers to reinstate the former laborers on demobilization, while measures were devised to safeguard workers from arbitrary dismissal. Workers who felt that they had been treated unfairly could appeal to an arbitration court, and in case of necessity the demobilization authorities had the power to determine who should be dismissed and who should be retained in employment. On the 29th of November 1918, the denial of voting rights to welfare recipients was repealed. A government proclamation of December 1918 ordered farmers to re-employ returning soldiers at the former working place and to provide work for the unemployed, while an important decree was issued that same month in support of Jugendpflege. In December 1918, the government granted provisionally the continuation of a maternity allowance introduced during the Great War, while a decree issued in January 1919 mandated the employment of disabled veterans. A settlement decree was issued by the government on the 29th of January 1919 concerning the acquisition of land for the settlement of workers on the land that foresaw the possibility of expropriating estates over 100 hectares to facilitate settlement. Quote, however, only just over 500,000 hectares were freed by 1928, benefiting 2.4% of the farming population. In addition, Ebert's government got food supplies moving again and issued various decrees related to the promotion of civil aviation and restrictions on firearm possession. Civil War. In the weeks following the creation of the Council of the People's Deputies, Ebert and the leadership of the SPD sided with the conservative and nationalistic elements in German society against the forces of the revolution. The latter wanted to eliminate initiate the challenge to the existing order posed by the workers' councils as soon as possible. Yet the majority of those in the workers' and soldiers' councils viewed themselves as supporters of the government. It was only the Spartacists who wanted a dictatorship of the workers. Ebert and Graener worked out a program to restore order in Berlin by having army units returning from the Western Front move in and disarm all paramilitary forces from 10 to the 15th of December. However, after the 10 divisions had arrived, rather than remaining as a cohesive force, they dispersed. On the 16th of December, the Reichsrat Congress met in Berlin and set the date for elections to the National Assembly for the 19th of January 1919. However, it also passed a resolution that was aimed at ensuring that the military would be under the strict control of the civilian government, i.e., the Council of the People's Deputies. It also called for a powerful position of the soldiers' councils vis-à-vis the professional officer corps. This was unacceptable to the leaders of the military, and they all began to establish volunteer regiments in the Berlin area. Fighting erupted on the 24th of December on the Schlossplatz in Berlin. On the 23rd of December, dissatisfied members of the Navy occupied the Chancellery and put the People's Deputies under house arrest. Ebert asked the Earl for help over the phone, and troops assembled on the outskirts of the capital. During the night, Ebert then ordered these troops to attack, which they did in the morning of the 24th of December. When the fighting stopped in the afternoon, the Navy forces held the field, but they returned to the barracks, ending the crisis. As a result of this event, which Karl Liebknecht called Ebert's Bloody Christmas, the USPD members left the Council of the People's Deputies on the 29th of December. The next day, SPD members Gustav Noske and Rudolf Wissel took the place, and from that point on, government communiques were signed Reichsregierung instead of Council of the People's Deputies. Quote, the same day, the Spartacists severed the remaining links with the USPD and set themselves up as the Communist Party of Germany. The week of 5 to 12 January 1919 became known as Spartacus Week, but historians view this as a misnomer. The Spartacist uprising was more an attempt by the Berlin workers to regain what they thought had been won in the November Revolution, and what they now seem to be in the process of losing. The trigger was a trivial event. The head of the Berlin police, a member of the USPD, refused to accept his dismissal. The USPD called for a demonstration of solidarity, but was itself surprised by the reaction as hundreds of thousands, many of them armed, gathered in the city center on the 5th of January. They seized the newspapers and railway stations. Representatives from the USPD and KPD decided to topple the Ebert government. However, the next day, the gathered masses did not seize government buildings, as the expected support from the military did not materialize. Ebert started to negotiate with the leaders of the uprising, but simultaneously prepared for military action. Noske was made commander of the Freikorps, and Ebert worked to mobilize the regular armed forces of the Berlin area on the government's side. From 9 to the 12th of January on Ebert's orders, regular forces and Freikorps successfully and bloodily suppressed the uprising.